Okay, hey family. Thank you for having this conversation with me, and I appreciate you indulging me responding via video. I thought it would just be an easier way to have this conversation. Despite having taught on Zoom for over a year last year, high school, I still don't quite know if I'm supposed to be looking at myself or at that little dot. But anyway, so here I am hiding out in Desmond's room while the kids are having a little afternoon TV time, and I wanted to talk about the vaccine and how it works and why I believe it's safe and effective, and in particular address the concerns that you raised, Christy, because I shared many of those same concerns when this was all first developing. And it's something that we talked about at my high school last year a lot, and I wanted to make sure I could answer students on how the vaccine was developed. How does mRNA technology actually work? Why was it developed so quickly? If it was developed so quickly, is it still safe? How do we know what side effects, what potential side effects there are, etc. So I did a lot of research on this, and that's what I'm going to share with you. But I think in order to answer the first question about, okay, is it safe or not, right? Is it just an experimental therapy that we don't know very much about? We first have to learn how DNA works, really. And some of this you may already know, so you can ignore me, but this was new for me, or at the very least felt new for me, even if I had studied it in school a long time ago. So generally, our body is made up of lots and lots of cells, and inside every cell, whether it's a skin cell or a liver cell or whatever, is our DNA. Our DNA lives in the nucleus of a cell. And one of the jobs of DNA is to provide instructions to create proteins for our body. And proteins, amino acids, you may have heard them called, are the building blocks of life. So, our DNA and our muscle cells, for instance, is going to tell our body, it's going to provide the instructions to other parts of the cell on how to create proteins to restore muscles after they're used, when you go and work out, for instance. This is going to happen in all of our organs and all of our tissues. It happens when we're babies and we're born. Our cells are constantly reproducing and or producing proteins. And so how this normally works is you have your cell, right? And you could think of the nucleus as a little circle here. And inside the nucleus lives the DNA, and that's like enclosed, right? There's cytoplasm all around, and that can't get into the nucleus and vice versa. So you have the nucleus, and what the DNA normally does is it has instructions. Let's say it wants to build, another skin cell, and it will then act sort of like, I think the best analogy for this is like a restaurant. So the DNA is like the customer, I guess, and it says, I want some, lemonade. And so it tells the waiter, which is our messenger RNA, in other words, mRNA, it says, here's my order. I want lemonade, and I want, pasta, and I want some dessert. The mRNA writes all that down, right? It then delivers that to the chef, which is the ribosome, which is also inside the cell. This is where these proteins are created. The instructions that it's written down from DNA go through the ribosome, like as if it's taking in like the little paper that the waiter wrote, and then it produces the proteins or the amino acids in the correct order that was specified on the waiter's instructions. And that's how we create proteins. That's obviously a super oversimplified version, or maybe not super oversimplified, but I think that's an easy way to understand it. And that's completely natural. That's what happens all day long, every day in all of us. With this vaccine, what's super interesting and what is so novel, and what probably will win the Nobel Prize at some point, is that scientists figured out, after researching, by the way, for decades, people have been studying mRNA, messenger RNA, and how it could be used for treatment of cancer, for example, other types of influenza, Ebola. They've been studying it for a long time because they realized, look, if we could figure out how to create like a synthetic version of this messenger RNA, then we could tell the body what to create a protein that fights this kind of cancer, or to create, whatever have you. And so for a long time, they couldn't figure out how to get a synthetic messenger RNA inside a cell without it either just degrading and falling apart, or without it provoking some sort of immune response on its own. And so what was new, fairly recently, but this was even true back during Ebola days because there were already clinical trials of this kind of vaccine, is that scientists figured out there was a way by sort of encapsulating the synthetic mRNA into a lipid, a little bit of a fat, to get it into your cell, but not into your DNA, not into your nucleus, intact. And so what they realized is, okay, they could just take messenger RNA, which is literally just a sequence of essentially letters that code for your amino acids for these proteins, what will become proteins. And they can inject that into your cell. In this case, they inject it into a muscle cell, typically, right? Your cell receives it. It does not ever enter the nucleus. So when people say, oh, doesn't this like change your DNA? No, not at all. In fact, that's impossible because it would have to actually interact with DNA, which it doesn't because the DNA is in the nucleus and the mRNA, the messenger RNA, always lives outside of the nucleus. And so when it's injected, it also stays outside of the nucleus. And so your cell's like, oh, great, here's some instructions. Let me bring it to the ribosome. Brings it to the ribosome, goes through and churns out what it was instructed to produce. In this case, what is so cool is that it can instruct it to produce the spike protein of the coronavirus, which is something that A, is highly recognizable to our bodies because there is no such protein in our body that looks like the spike protein on a coronavirus, and B, it lives outside of the coronavirus itself. It's on the outside of the coronavirus cell. So you don't even need to ask your body to create the actual virus itself. You're just creating the thing that allows the virus to get in your own cells and infect your cells. So so just to backtrack a little bit to clarify, the reason it's called a coronavirus, and you may have heard of the spike protein, is because it has like this, looks like a little crown around the cell. And it has these little spike proteins. And normally, like the virus wouldn't be able to get into our own cells and our body because, again, it's surrounded by like lipids, by fat. Fat and water don't mix, can't break in it. But this spike protein that it has evolved to have, this coronavirus, can penetrate our own cells. And so as a result, it penetrates, goes in our cells, replicates, and before our body, so this is if you normally got infected, before our body realizes, oh, this is an invader, it's already reproduced a bunch, and that's how you get really sick. So what the new vaccine technology does is it says, hey, own body, here are instructions specifically for building just this little piece of the coronavirus, just the spike protein. So it doesn't even build any of the actual sort of virus causing, proteins. It's just building the spike protein. And does that, your body recognizes the spike protein. It starts to create antibodies to the spike protein. Those antibodies attack the spike protein. The spike protein eventually disappears because it's been attacked like it would under normal circumstances. And the spike protein itself is out of your body in, 2 to 4 weeks, which is typical for when, let's say, you get a cold and your body sees an invader, it attacks it, and eventually goes away. It breaks down in your lymphatic system. And I'm pointing to your shoulder and your lymph nodes. In addition, the messenger RNA itself, right, that little piece of the cell that was injected, that degrades and breaks down in a couple of days. So nothing stays in your body with this technology. I know some people had some concerns about that, but that's not how it works. mRNA is actually very, very fragile, which is one of the whole reasons why it had to be in such cold environments, etc. And so once it's injected, it's in there for about 3 days, breaks down in your cell, never messes with your DNA, doesn't alter DNA in any way, shape, or form. Your body produces the spike protein. That's what creates the immune response. Your body then recognizes it, produces the antibodies, and then in the future, if you're exposed to somebody with coronavirus, it recognizes those antibodies, and then is able to already have the it recognizes those proteins, it's able to have the antibodies already stored up, and it can fight it off before it has a chance to replicate. And why that's so important is because, for example, with this new Delta variant, this variant replicates much more quickly. So, as soon as you get it, it just, and the more replication that happens, the more symptoms you have, typically the worse it is. And so that's why if you already have the antibodies in you, it's much more quickly killed off, which is why they have seen that even though with this new variant, people who are vaccinated can still get the virus and possibly transmit it. That's what they're trying to figure out. It's still 95, 98, whatever percent effective at reducing any sort of severe symptoms or death, which is what we're after. Okay, I have my notes here, so let's see. I don't want to make this too long of a video, so I think maybe let me stop here, and then I'm going to answer the next question in a separate video.